significant variables, and what are some of the key drivers which makes a difference or which influence these variables, so that the overall outcome variable, which in this case is a productivity or utilization, can be measured. So we wanted to dive deeper into this aspect and understand technically or through some examples how we go about it. So that's what we plan to do today. Anand, any other aspect that you wanted to add on this?
No, I think that summarizes it fairly well. So let me share my screen and talk through.
Sorry, Anand. Just in addition to what you just mentioned, I remember telling you about this announcement.
Yeah.
And back then there was no announcement, so there was an announcement after our call. So I want to give you an update on the announcement, and also I think I told you about this approach that we are planning to take in terms of taking the baseline operating model, etc., etc. So don't want to get into too much of details, but if you can give me just maybe 10 minutes, I can cover the announcement as well as the updates, and then we can drill in. I hope that what you prepared to discuss today is a subset of the overall thing that we are trying to achieve here.
Got you. In fact, Sangan, we can start with that. So that will allow you to plan the rest of the session.
Sure. Okay, let me see if I can find okay, good. So this is still an internal announcement. And it was a creation. It was about a creation of this new role, reporting directly into the new CEO, Abhijit. And the role is called Chief Digital Officer. And then Dilip Kumar is taking this role effective immediately. This announcement was made about 2 weeks ago. But that was it. So there hasn't been any announcement on the org structure of Dilip's organization, nothing. But Praveen and I, we are all supporting William and Dilip, creating the plan basically for this new role. And this new role will cover predominantly 3 functions. One is the existing IT function. So the SAP, Salesforce, all these companies, IT functions will be under Dilip's responsibility. I don't know whether you're familiar with the current org structure and executives. So Neil Lowe will be retiring, and somebody else will take the role of CIO, Chief Information Officer, and the CIO will report into Dilip.
Got it.
And the second function is about this is the third part, the Global Shared Services Center. I think I told you about this function. So GSSC, so-called, is already existing. However, we are basically taking a slightly different approach to increase the scope of Global Shared Service Center. That's why we'll do all this baselining in terms of people, cost, process, policies, and others. The second point is just that the regional IT heads will report into Dilip. So Dilip now has a pretty big responsibility as what we call N-1, which means directly reporting into the CEO.
Got it.
And then he will continue to play the role of the delivery transformation, which is his current title. Which was his title 2 weeks ago. So that's basically three responsibilities. First of all, IT. Secondly, Global Share Center. Third, the delivery transformation, MSNSS.
Got it.
So all these analytics that we have been working on, pretty much enabling the delivery transformation. If you think about it, the MRR, platform consumption, all these different pieces. Now we just need to extend the scope from the cost of sales or the gross profit perspective to the overall operating profit or overhead, just SG&A perspective. So that was the announcement. And very quickly, this is the approach that we are taking. So maybe it's a bit small. So basically, we are doing all this baselining in terms of capabilities, people, applications, systems, policy, process, data, and what the current GSSC unit is doing. Taking all this as input, we are planning to define the GBS operating model. What kind of roles that GBS will take on, and how GBS will work together with the regions and other central functions. And for that, what is the required digital infrastructure to enable that? And of course, as I said, like operating profit improvement is the key KPI. So in the end, after all this, we need to achieve certain operating profit target. So how much will it be? So that's the steps that we are taking. So in terms of the first step, the baselining. So first of all, we needed to have a common framework to be able to make sense out of two different, let's say, metrics. For example, cost and people and application, cost and process. So in terms of the common framework and taxonomy, we decided to use this capability model, which was developed by the INT team or the CIO team. And this capability model consists of broadly 4 areas or 4 processes. And then there are like a lot of sub capabilities. There are like 21 big capabilities, that is like including marketing, sales, clients. And per each of these, it also consists of 10 to 20 sub capabilities. And each sub capability consists of also 20 plus, I don't know, like level 3 capabilities.
Correct.
So that's the framework that we decided to use. So everything that like the volume metrics that we are doing, the people, cost, all this baselining will have to be based on this common framework. So there will be a lot of mapping exercise that we are currently doing. Just an example of the capabilities in terms of the lead to quote. And the second area for the baselining is the cost.
Correct.
Also the headcount, related headcount. And the third one is around the application and infrastructure. So we have this SAP global template, which is more or less already virtualized, meaning that all the, irrespective of the geography, the people who use this system, we have this one system where we can extract, the data to the central repository, whereas the ex-entity communications business have multiple different systems because of the way we sort of grew our business. It was through M&A pretty much. So all these different systems, how are basically constraints for any centralization or migration. So there should be a roadmap. Like maybe we can start with the green ones, which is already virtualized, and then take on more from the non-green one to the green one, and then for those the red ones that are completely on different system, not just different instance. Like what should be the plan? So the baselining has been already done. So we know exactly which legal entity is using what system.
Perfect.
This is another snapshot of of course, this legal entity geography, CMS secure 24 different affiliates for marketing, what they use, website, sales, CPQ, etc., and what is the plan, what is the currently in place, what is the planned system going forward. So just baselining, no plan. Then another one is the existing policies. What is the list of the policies that are out there? So when we, let's say, centralize, when we create this GSSC or GBS, whether we already have standardized central policies that we can just stick to, or whether we need to develop something new because currently it doesn't exist. Processes. Also, there is another team in INT, which is just dedicated to this process documentation and discovery. So there has been some progress. We are using Signavio as a vendor, and then they are helping us to first of all document the existing processes and then monitor, for example, the volume metric. So when we spoke last time, we didn't have any visibility on the current status of the process baselining. But after that, we have seen there has been quite a lot of progress, and we could also see a process map. For example, okay, why? It comes back to this. This is people and culture process consists of multiple different sub-processes. Then we have a process map with the arrow, who is the player, which system is being used, what is the transaction volume, what is the lead time from process A to B, so on and so forth. Not perfect, not for all, but for some areas we do have some. So in the end, what we want to create is something like this across these different areas, using a common framework. Across these areas, using the capability model that I introduced a few slides ago. And we will pull everything and use that as an input to develop the GBS operating model.
Got it.
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect.
Any questions?
No, this was very clear, and it also looks like there's been considerable progress over the last few weeks, Sangin. So glad to see this. And I do take away from our last discussion that one of the key new initiatives is identifying how we can reduce the SG&A, and this effectively feeds into that. So, no, I mean, in fact, it all seems to fit together a whole lot better than when I understood it last time. So, no questions.
Okay. Then I'm sorry, before moving on to the topic that you prepared, maybe I can also share the immediate challenge that I'm facing in terms of the people baselining. So maybe I can use another slide for that. And each one of the challenges that I'm facing, and I'm just trying to share this with you so I can get some ideas from you on improving the data quality, or even having a metric to measure the data accuracy or data quality. So let me see. Okay. One example or challenges that I'm facing is the people baselining. So in NTT, there are 49,000 people, either as a form of permanent employee, contractor, subcontractor, but in our HR system, that includes Excel. That's the number of headcounts that we currently have. And of course, if those resources are on our HR platform, we can get the compensation data out of that. And the problem is basically one of the objectives of doing this baselining is to understand the people productivity or people costs. So for people costs, there are two data sources. One is the people side, so HR platform, from which we can get the headcount, and the other cost, the other element, cost. The true single source of truth is our income statement, our P&L. And then those two different systems don't usually talk to each other.
Right.
So on one hand, we have this system called BPC, where we extract all this, revenue, costs, all these financial metrics. On the other hand, we also have this HR system like Workday, HRIS, SuccessFactor, where we can see the details of the people element. But when we try to marry these together, first thing that we need to do was, again, having a common framework, like which bucket we need to use, how to categorize this, people and the cost. So this was the sort of the framework created. And when we put these two things together, absolutely it doesn't make any sense at all.
Interesting.
I have seen the wrong accounting treatment, or not accounting treatment, accounting classification in the P&L side. So for example, the people cost, let's say the support services delivery cost, should be classified under COGS of support services. Now that cost is sitting in the managed services for some reasons. And also on the people side, the people who actually deliver these services should be classified as support service delivery, but somehow they are part of SG&A or some other. So that's currently what we have. And we are trying to improve the data quality, but then the truth is we don't know what is correct or not.
Got you.
That's a big challenge. So one idea that HR and I discussed was having this metric, discrepancy assessment metric. So basically, using the BPC cost divided by the head count at a granular level by service, by country, and then get the same number from external source.
Got you.
So usually in the market, what is the typical average cost or range of the costs, and then compare these two.
Got you.
And if it is within the benchmark range, then we can be reasonably comfortable with the data quality, either headcount or the cost. If not, then something or both of them, cost and headcount, must be wrong. So need to be corrected. So this is one of the challenges that I'm facing.
Got it.
So hopefully I can get some insights. From your experience, how to tackle this problem.
Since this is an immediate challenge, maybe we can dive in a little bit into this, Sankin. So a couple of questions. Firstly, let us say that this problem is solved. Assume that we now have perfect data. What would be the next step?
The next step is basically design the operating model that includes the scope of functions or capabilities that GBS take on. For example, if there is for marketing, let's say we are incurring, like $10 million per year for this marketing function, and which is quite fragmented across different geographies. And then let's say we have X number of people working in that function. And we will look at the existing process and systems to assess whether it's easy to centralize this function, so we can get some savings by removing duplication, automating, using all these levers. But the most important metric that we first look at is the cost. If the cost is minimum, no point of trying to do any, put a lot of efforts. If the cost is quite a lot, then probably we will try to do something about that. But the problem is our income statement is not structured based on these functions.
No, got it.
And we cannot link that to the system constraints.
Right.
That's why we need to have this common framework and then use that to baseline the headcount and costs.
Got it. It seems to me then that cost is the primary prioritization device, in the sense that we'd focus on rationalizing the costs for the high cost areas, and where the cost is low anyway, it's probably not worth the effort of doing that mapping or even doing that analysis. So if you could go back to the headcount slide, the slide that had those three tables. On this, it strikes me that, let's see, MS has, managed services has by far the highest cost. And sorry, this is not, to read this, thank you. And if we take, for example, digital or shared technologies, it's less than, close to around 1% of just the managed services cost, and certainly less than 1% of the overall cost. It's probably not worth diving deep into that. In fact, if we see, since we see that managed services is more than 50% of the overall cost, perhaps, and I'm talking about cost of sales particularly, we could do a similar exploration on the overhead side. But one way of thinking about it is, we are really looking for that largest bucket to do this on, meaning the objective may not necessarily be to get this table right, but to get a column right first, because that's where the maximum bang for the buck is, and then evaluating whether we go to the others. But do you see risks with that approach?
Sorry, I'm not understanding the approach that you're explaining. What do you mean by it's not about getting the number right, it's about getting the column right? Or the bucket, sorry, maybe I...
So what you're looking at is, what is the per employee productivity for every cell here? Is that right?
I'm No, it's headcount cost per head.
Okay, which is okay, the pure cost, okay, cost per person. Now, if we had it for, let's say, only the 10 biggest cells out here, roughly what percentage of the total headcount cost might this cover? The top 10 cells.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, 70%.
Got you. That was the first part of my suggested approach, which is perhaps we, rather than creating an approach that covers all cells, of which there are well over 100, just 10% of those cells would give us 70% of the cost, perhaps.
I think maybe. So the reason why we need to have this common framework is that you cannot just look at the headcount in isolation of the other. Even if let's say there is the biggest cost bucket, we can easily see from, let's assume that for a second this table is correct. It isn't. But let's say it's the biggest cost bucket is finance, for example, 2,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can get the savings from this, or the amount of saving is proportional to the number of people. It doesn't mean that. Why? Because there is this system constraint. If we are using 10 different systems, we cannot just, centralize people having the 10 different systems still in place in different geographies with the current license costs. It's not going to happen. So it's not just about purely using this headcount column out of this, let's say, 6 different elements: headcount, cost, process, and system. We need to look at all this holistically to be able to make a plan. It's not just the objective is not just prioritizing based on the headcount. That's why, again, we need to have this common framework which isn't aligned to this. And then, okay, let me see if I have that. Okay. So again, the point is not about prioritizing purely based on the headcount. So just having a rough estimate of headcount especially based on this framework, is not going to work. You should be able to map the raw data behind this to another framework, which is not this, which is the capability model that I introduced.
So you need to know.
Sorry, given the time, let me just. So my challenge is not about the prioritization approach. My challenge is specific to the data quality. So discrepancy, right? Again, on one hand, I'm looking at this $10 million cost. When I look at the supposedly the same bucket in terms of the headcount, there is only one person. Mm-hmm. Is he getting $10 million per year? Absolutely not. Fair. So either the headcount bucket or the cost bucket is wrong, or maybe both of them are wrong.
Got it. So what you'd kind of like, I guess, is for each of these cells, a number that says this is how good or how bad the quality is in that particular cell, based on, based on some kind of a calculation. Got you. There are usually 3 quality metrics that I find relevant in such cases. The first is a missing data indicator. So I guess that you've already applied, and if we see that we just don't have any cells in any values in that particular cell, that's one clear indicator. The second is what you're using, which is a ratio indicator. We expect the values to be consistent. So right now, I guess you are looking at the cost per head in each bucket, right? And saying, is this roughly consistent with what's there in a given geography? Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if you look at, for example, MIA, then for the first column, which is ICT, I think, or CT, If you could you zoom in into the headcount cost per head? Okay, each of these rows represents the cost per person,
No,
or
no, no. It's a head count,
okay?
purely head count.
Is there a headcount cost per person?
Not here.
Okay, okay. I thought that was the bottom one. But I guess that is the second table to make. What is the headcount cost per person? And in any given row that is within a region, it's unlikely to change significantly. So if there is more than a 10x variation, that's a clear red flag. And if it's more than a 5x variation, that is a potential red flag. That's a second one. The good part is you could drill down into it at multiple levels. So it's not just quality at one row or column level, but you could have a further level of drill down. What I usually do is take the difference from the mean. So, for example, actually, let me share my screen
Yep.
and I'll talk through how we might do this. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's say we have a data set where I have, say, MS, SIS, and a few others. And let's say we have regions, APAC, and AU, though, okay, AU is no longer region, but that's fine. And this is the cost per head as a metric that we use. So if out here you have, let's say, 70K per, let's say this is $K per year as the metric, and this is 80, and we have an overall which let's say is 75. This isn't too bad. Let's say the overall here is 50. Now we have a 20 and a 90. That's a little more of a variation. And let's say this was 100, and we have here 1 and no, 180 or some such thing. The metric that we can look at is what is the variation from the average. So if I take each of these values and these values and say that I expect the value to match the average here. So that's 93%, that's 107%. And obviously this is at 100%. Out here we have 40 and 180. And out here we have 1 and 180. Now, the closer this is to 100, the easier it is. So if I put in a rule that says, yeah, well, for now, let's just do a lowest to highest kind of thing with, no, let's in fact do a deviation. How different is this from 100%? Yeah. The closer this is to the average, the more comfortable we can be. And the higher away it is, the more worried we'd be. So, what this tells me at one shot is I definitely look at the data quality for Australia and a little bit for APAC and AU. But if these values were somewhat more uniform, say 40 and 50, or 40 and 55, some such thing, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. So this is a quick one-shot heat map where you say, for a given region, I look at the variation. This is at the first level. Any questions on this before I go ahead?
No, no.
Okay. So the next question on top of this is, could we improve the accuracy of this? Could we model it? Now, ultimately, here we have done an implicit model. The model here is that the cost for any cell is the same as this. But could we do a second order model? That is, if we also have, let's say, an overall here. Overall. Yeah. And this had pick something, let's say 50 and let's say 90. And all of this overall put together, let's say, comes to 70. Now, it's possible to create an expectation matrix, a second order model from here, saying that look, a person in a given region, we expect to have a certain kind of cost. A person in a certain function, we expect to have a certain kind of cost. What are those expected values? Well, we say this divided by, sorry. We find that this is around 71% of the total cost here. Whereas for SS, it's around 129%. So we would expect something like 71% of the total cost of 70 for this entire row. So meaning it wouldn't be surprising if we found that every person was at 50 in each of these, because the assumption here is generally managed services has this kind of cost. Similarly, for a given region, we have the percentages. So that's 75 divided by 70, and that's slightly higher. So in MEA, it's slightly higher than average. In APAC, it's slightly lower than average. In AU, it's much higher than average. So given this, we can create a matrix that says, I'll take this column's percentage. So that's going to repeat for the entire column. 6. And this is going to repeat for the entire row. So, and then multiply it by this overall cost. So that's comma. Yeah. So this is a model that says that I expect these values if the costs are independent. Meaning, we know that in MEA, they're slightly more expensive than average, but in managed services, they are less expensive than average. And based on both of these on an average cost base, I'd expect 54. Then compute the difference of the actual versus this, and then see the difference. This becomes a second order expectation or a second order quality check.
Okay.
Was this part clear?
But the second order quality check, so after the first order, based on the geographical variance, looking the table down below.
Yeah.
If the approach, suggested approach is to prioritize first, to look at and then again, like do something about it. I think we achieved the objective by having an understanding of AU for MS and SS being having the most delta.
Correct.
And then for that, we probably need to look at both headcount and cost, trying to understand where the discrepancy or the potentially incorrect data is coming from. But then the second order approach, the table on the right hand side, is it an alternative approach that you're suggesting, or is it the next step after the
it's a more accurate step. Takes a little more effort, but more accurate.
Okay.
Now, why is that? Because somebody in AU might say, well, look, it turns out that not everyone in AU is expensive. People in managed services are not very expensive. So we need to account for that. Yeah. If we just went to them and said, look, guys, you have an average cost of 100, and I don't think you can get, let's make the numbers a little more realistic. Let's say this is 50 and 150. So you go to somebody in Australia and say, I don't think you can get somebody for half the average cost. They say, well, look, actually the people in managed services are generally less expensive. And then we look at the other regions and say, oh yeah, okay, that's true for APAC as well. That's true for MEA as well. The cost here is less. So can we adjust for that? That's what this does. What this is saying is that having done that adjustment, we expect that someone in managed services in Australia will have a cost of 71. Not 100, not your average, but still 71, not as low, because nowhere else is that discrepancy so high. So now we compute the revised discrepancy. what's the absolute deviation between this versus this divided by the overall cost. So that's 23%, 23, yeah, okay, 23%.
Yeah, I get the idea, Anand. Yeah. So basically, yeah.
So what this allows you is, and now we see that in MIA we have an issue because it looks like managed services in MIA is actually more expensive than they need to be, and shared services is less expensive. Now, this we did with two dimensions. We can extend to a third and a fourth, effectively saying that we expect certain roles, certain age groups, whatever information you get. Based on that, you can say for this, if they were all independent, this is the kind of expected value. And how is that different from the actual? So this is the third phase where we do multidimensional model building to say, I predict that the cost is going to be so much if they are all independent and find the deviation from the prediction.
And is this practically used to check the data quality?
Yes, this is
because I think the underlying assumption there is that there is commonality. Either you look at the numbers vertically or horizontally, there is this commonality. And yeah, maybe we can assign certain weightage. For example, the geographical delta is a lot more significant than the role level delta between MS and SS. But the thing is like in the end, the headcount cost per head that we will put into this table is consisting of already two variables, headcount and the total cost.
Correct.
Total cost divided by headcount. And we don't know one is right or both of them are incorrect.
Correct.
And using still like incorrect data set, using this model to identify potentially which cells having the most issue. Is it practically?
Yes. And the reason is this number is very unlikely to be wrong. It's total number of people in the organization and total cost of the organization. Each of these numbers are slightly more, but not so much more likely to be wrong either.
Okay.
So what we're doing is saying, I know that at the aggregate levels, and you can have as many aggregates as you want, but any row or column that you aggregate with, it's going to be more robust. And use that to then interpolate, the assumption for the interpolation being that they are independent.
And in one ground assumption or requirement on this, I think Sangin, your question is also around that, is to be able to benchmark for a particular region what a cost per head count for a particular role in MS or a SS would look like. And that benchmark is what is allowing you to define this. This exercise, Anand, reminds me of one of my past experiences where we were creating a zero cost model for a mobility support program. So any of the international travels that happens or relocation happens, how IBM is to create this zero profit model and understand that the productivity for each of the different markets is maintained. So like you said, AU as a location, what would be a typical headcount cost will look like? The global leaders would have an indication. Whereas you say that the support is being provided by a low cost country like Indonesia or from someone from Africa, then they knew what is a benchmark, and any indication that comes that, okay, a business unit is being charged X dollars, which might be higher than the benchmark, then they knew that, okay, something is wrong somewhere. And this benchmarking is what allowed them to identify that delta and how often this delta happens, because over a period of time that can magnify. That's what I observe, the same framework on this too on.
Exactly. And this is a robust model for internal benchmarking, meaning coming up with an expected cost. What we're really saying is this is what we expect the cost to be. And this expected cost is robust because it only relies on the rows and column totals, which are far less likely to be wrong. And then you compare the expectation with the actual and say, oh, that looks like a big deviation. That looks like a small deviation. So this in APAC MS, it's very close, 40 and 36, yeah, just 6% difference. But 71 versus 50, that's much bigger. And you start examining that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Anand.
Please. On the actual calculations, if at any point you have questions around the validity of the assumptions, feel free to let me know. But I'm conscious we haven't covered what we had originally planned. But that's okay. I hope this was useful, and we can certainly plan that for some other time. Not an issue.
Okay, do you think you need 30 plus minutes to cover that? Because I'm thinking that we have more. I don't know.
Oh, we have 2 minutes, I think.
We budgeted for 45?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have it for 45 minutes.
Okay. That's quite unusual.
No. I mean, I think it's good to have crisp focus meetings because we certainly got very useful inputs on where the direction is, and I'd like to absorb and digest that for sure. And secondly, hopefully we've given some inputs on a specific challenge that you're looking at, which is how does one go about the benchmark. So let's set up a follow-up session whenever, and Nishal, take your help on this, where we look at the answer to the question, how do we find out which column is the biggest driver of an outcome?
Thank you. By the way, again, this was one of the challenges that I'm facing, and what you explained was useful. But I think I just want you to be aware of the FY21 focus. That's, I think, a lot bigger than what we just discussed. It's SG&A, and then data quality is a big issue for us. So we used headcount and headcount cost as an example of challenges, but we are and we will face a lot more challenges dealing with the other data sets. And then whenever we have this data quality issue, I think that it would be good to have a secondary, either a model or metric to be able to assess how wrong that is. Very often we just rely on our common sense without knowing what good looks like. Yeah.
Why don't we do this then? Maybe the next call, let's plan specifically on a data quality framework. We'll share what we've seen and put together a small deck that says, here are the more robust methods that people use. And you could use that and drive an internal data quality metric approach.
Sounds good. If you can, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Okay, then.
Sangin, are there any other highlights that you want to talk? Like you mentioned, this is one of the immediate challenges that you're looking at from cost and data quality aspect. Is there anything else that you would want us to consider for our next connect? I can plan something maybe next week, same time.
Yeah, I don't think we have time. I have time to explain the challenges. It's not very simple. So maybe we can take the next touch point. So we can also share more challenges, and then you can also share your experience and insights.
No problem.
Let's do that. Great.
Okay.
I plan something for next week, same time then?
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah, I'll keep it for 60 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Anand, Nisha. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.